All right, what's up, guys? And we are live. It's Wednesday night, week 3 of the NFL coming up. Chuck and Chris here to bring you the first look. We're going to go ahead and draft some battle royales on Underdog while we talk about the slate. Chris, how we doing?
I'm excited to get into week 3 because week 2 was not a very good week for me in DFS streets, but willing to get back at it, right? And I think we have a lot of good spots on the board this week. And I think the Battle Royale contests this week are going to be super fun with all of the question marks I think we have with some high end players, right?
Yeah, and so one of the concepts we talked about in Best Ball Summer was drafting early to get ADP value. If you're willing to take the chance on I'm still drafting CD Lamb first every time, but Justin Jefferson and Nico Collins have started falling in drafts. It sounds like Justin Jefferson's going to play Nico Collins. I have no idea. I'm hoping it's just a rest day. I'm drafting him a bunch, but I think there is an edge this week in the draft. So before anything, we're just going to go ahead and jump in, and then we'll take a look at what I guess the players that we want to target from the model.
Interesting that the player with the highest ADP this week is CD Lamb in this Cowboys Ravens game that we have on Sunday afternoon, Chuck. And he just actually flagged as questionable on Dallas's first practice report today. I think maybe we have a chance to see CD slide a little bit in these contests as a result.
Yeah, I did a bunch of drafts today, and I don't know if I noticed him sliding as much, but like Nico Collins, I was able to get it pick 10 a couple times. Justin Jefferson, I got it like pick 17, which seems ridiculous. But these top receivers seem even more valuable this week with the uncertainty around these other guys, and there's really just not that many top receivers on this slate, I guess. Well, there's 4, but
Right.
after that.
Yeah, so CD Lamb was limited or did not practice today with an ankle injury. It's only Wednesday. This is typically like a veteran rest day, and I guess they're required to list some kind of status update here, right, Chuck? But I am not at this point worried about CD Lamb. If he misses again tomorrow, I think that's when we can probably sound the panic alarm.
Yeah, and that's one thing. I'm going to draft early in the week. I'm going to get most of my drafts in on Saturday, probably. So I get a mix of some ADPs, but I do want to be able to catch early ADP value if there is some. And if you're using the model, you want to sort it by FanDuel. If you're using it for Underdog, it's the same scoring. The difference is FanDuel has the 3 extra points now for 100 plus yards receiving, rushing. So that doesn't really matter too much here. Justin Jefferson, number 1 in the model, CD Lamb, Amon Ra, Devontae kind of bunched up as the next guys with Nico Collins and Devonta Smith. I'm still taking CD Lamb number 1, but Justin Jefferson has a pretty big lead in the model. So is there anything that you see at the top here?
Devontae Adams is jumping off the page for me a little bit there in that Las Vegas Raiders Carolina Panthers game, Chuck. I think that is probably something that is going to go a little bit lower owned here in Battle Royale. I'm looking for Adams ADP. It looks like it's in the 3rd round, right? Pick 14.1. So, and we have him as like a top 5 receiver on the slate. So that seems like a good spot to take advantage of here.
Yeah, and we have a OG1 Kenobi in the chat. Scroll down, wide receiver week incoming. Absolutely. There's a ton of options down here. And I think especially if you're using the Occupy model, the top is going to generally be the top projected from other sites. But after that, Devonta Smith, Malik Neighbors, DJ Moore, Chris Godwin, Tyreek Hill's all the way down here, DK Metcalf. And these are all scroll down candidates. These guys aren't getting drafted.
I assume that we're aligned on this. Correct me if I'm wrong. Baltimore and Dallas seems like one of the better games to stack this week, not just because it has one of the higher totals on the slate, but because it's easier, I guess, to kind of draft the players we think have the most ceiling here. Like CD Lamb obviously is your first pick here, but Lamar Jackson's going around pick 16 at quarterback for Baltimore. I think with his rushing upside, we can say he has a little bit more upside than Dak. And then you get Zay Flowers at receiver for Baltimore, basically in the last round, if he even gets drafted at all. And that's without even talking about Mark Andrews and some of the other options on the Dallas side. So that's to me, Chuck, if I get the first pick like you did here, that I think is what I'm trying to do with my team.
Absolutely. And I think I've done this in most of my CD Lamb teams so far. I have this currently sorted by game total. So top 3 games: Detroit, Arizona, New Orleans, Philadelphia, Dallas, Baltimore. And then after that, there's a little bit of a drop off. But I think these are the top 3 games we want to target. And I'm playing it through Zay Flowers more. I did take Likely a couple times. I'm a little bit nervous to take Andrews. Maybe that's incorrect. But as far as receivers go, is it just Flowers all day?
I think so. Especially we got confirmation last week that he's basically going to be the go-to guy. The target per route run volume was incredible for Zay Flowers again in week 2. He and Bateman both basically ran virtually every route in Baltimore's passing attack, but Flowers was targeted on 27% of his routes versus just 11% for Bateman, which makes sense. I think we see Flowers running a little bit more out of the slot, whereas Bateman's more of your kind of Gabe Davis on the Bills type receiver right now on this current version of the Ravens. So he's going to be, a spike week player with absolutely zero floor. But I guess that makes him, if we're thinking about Battle Royale as like a super, super large field tournament here, Chuck, I guess that makes Bateman kind of an interesting last round pick as like a differentiator against the field if we're going to be competing against all of these Lamar Jackson, CeeDee Lamb teams. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I was thinking about that earlier actually, because I did one of those 12-person drafts, same kind of format, 6 rounds, but it's, twice as many players are drafted. And I mean, Bateman's a fine pick in here, but I think he's a pretty great pick over there because he's also going undrafted in 12 rounds. And so that's a good spot to look because everyone's going to be on Flowers. And then I think a lot of people are going to be like me where, likely in Andrews it's hard to know what's going to happen there. So people just aren't going to want to go there.
Yeah, we have one more week, I think, until we're super comfortable with the full amount of data that we have for these passing attacks to fully unleash like a formal buy low / underperforming wide receiver list, Chuck. But through the first 2 weeks of play here, if we're going to stick with Baltimore for a second, Bateman has underperformed his opportunity by 11.7 PPR points, not half PPR points, but still significant opportunity for Bateman to kind of regress in a way we can benefit from in fantasy. The 2 receivers that have the largest gap between their expected fantasy points and their actual fantasy points so far on the season. I don't know what your thoughts are on drafting them for this type of contest, but we have Cortland Sutton with the Denver Broncos. He's underperforming his expected PPR points by 25 points over the first 2 weeks of the season. And Amari Cooper with the Cleveland Browns is underperforming his expected fantasy points by 24.3 PPR points. So virtually in the same territory as Cortland Sutton. I imagine neither of these guys is really being picked right now.
I can't imagine they are. And didn't Amari Cooper have like a 17 target day in week 1, or maybe it was week 2? But I think the same thing that I said. Like in 12-round drafts, they sound pretty great because they're still going to be available mostly in the late rounds over there.
We have obviously Josh Reynolds is with Denver now, and he's had a couple of nice games for them here. He's popped a little bit. I saw him as a popular waiver wire ad for a lot of people in like regular managed fantasy leagues. He is flashing on the injury report with some kind of Achilles issue. I think Cortland Sutton, even in these 6-team formats, Chuck, as like a last round pick, seems to have, there's like a data backed take here, right? That he has opportunity upside plus potentially some injuries in Denver's receiving room that he can benefit from. I think I might try to mix him in here. I will tell you, he's probably going to be one of the better high risk plays I'm going to be advocating for in this week's daily plug and in regular daily fantasy. That's for sure.
Oh, in regular daily fantasy, I'm pretty sure I'm going to force in some Bo Nix Sutton stacks this week with Chris Godwin as the run back. And we'll talk about Chris Godwin probably when you're drafting. I'm sure you'll be taking him, but I've been taking him a bunch. I am going to go Zay Flowers so I can get the quarterback stack here.
So, yeah, man. Chris Godwin has, I mean, we were both high on him all summer in the lead up to the start of the season here with Best Ball Mania drafts we were doing on the channel. And I think opportunities, I mean, why is Malik Neighbors still a last round pick here? He's basically the only player in the Giants offense that's getting the ball. He was targeted on like 69% of his routes last week. The average in the NFL is 21%. So he's very, very good, and he's commanding a ton of volume. Even I know it's Daniel Jones, but man, that seems like a really good last round pick, even if it's uncorrelated to me. Rashid Shaheed, all he does is catch 60-yard touchdowns, apparently. Tank Dell is another underperforming wide receiver, technically underperforming his expected opportunity by 18 fantasy points in what I'm looking at here. So all these picks at the very end. Amari Cooper is finally on this list. Calvin Ridley, another underperformer. You know that Calvin Ridley's average. All right, let me phrase it this way. On Calvin Ridley's 13 targets, Chuck, what do you think his average depth of target is? Calvin Ridley has 311 air yards on his 13 targets this season. His average depth of target is 23.9. He has 60% of Will Levis's air yards on the season. That's a player I think I'm shoving in as well here at the end of drafts, just because the upside is massive and it's going to pay off at some point here. And I'm sure your Titans fan roommate is really, really glad that I am talking about Calvin Ridley right now. Oh boy, let's go for it. So I don't know if this is going to come through okay on the show, but let's try it. Oh, I screwed up my sort here. Hold on. What I'm trying to show you is that Calvin Ridley leads the NFL in air yards. Um, you've got my Google sheet up on the screen now. Cool. So let's see here. Back to air yards. Calvin Ridley, number 6 in the NFL in terms of his weighted opportunity at receiver this year. Super underperforming that total. I thought Alec Pierce was kind of interesting. He's basically performed as expected at his low volume, high ADOT role with Anthony Richardson, but second in the NFL in total air yards. Dude, Anthony Richardson is just letting that thing fly. The Colts, he has a 14-yard average depth of target on all of his targets. It's by far the highest average depth of target for any team in the NFL right now. I was shocked by the team at the bottom of that list. And you can tell because you don't really see any of his receivers here. Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs have the lowest average depth of target on the season thus far at 5.1 yards. Obviously, is not impacting their results here at all. They're 2-0 to start the season. I'll jump into a draft. I will let you know that as far as top stacks this week, Baltimore and Dallas, we spent a little bit of time talking about while you were drafting. I also kind of like, and maybe I'm a little crazy to suggest this after the injury to one of these quarterbacks, but I kind of like Seattle and Miami this week, Chuck. I think that's a little bit of an under the radar one. Pretty easy to stack. Geno, DK, JSN, Lockett, I would say even is worth a flyer. And then on the Miami side, we know the ball is going to go to Tyreek. We know it's going to go to Waddle, and we know it's going to go to A-Chain. So I still think there's a lot of ceiling there with all those guys. Mhm. That's what I wanted to ask you about specifically from like a lineup building process here. I got the 6th pick here. With so many opportunities with, I guess, cheap to like potentially injured and replaced RBs this week, like, are you willing to kind of wait to get your running backs this week and then take advantage of like late swap if somebody's out? Like, I'm just thinking about like a Joe Mixon this week, for example. Mhm. Did that did that just happen? We got Jordan Mason is the first pick. I'm not confident in what his ADP is in this contest, but I feel like he's not a first round pick. Okay, so maybe that yeah. Mm. So for me, my top running backs this week on this slate: A Chain, Tony Pollard, Kamara, Kyron Williams, Zach Charbonnet, James Cook. That's what I'm looking at for running back. Right. I'm going to go with Justin Jefferson here because he's the number 1 receiver in our model, and you did a nice job displaying that. And then I'm going to take A Chain, who is my number 1 running back. I can hear Chuck. I don't know. So the people can't hear you. So That's great for content and for everybody listening. Thanks for being here. I'm going to continue drafting this team. Let us know if you can hear Chuck. I can hear him. He can hear me. Apparently, you guys are having a little bit of trouble with his audio, but we're still going to be talking about looking at top plays here in week 3, looking at the Occupy model. Um, we have quite a week ahead of us with high total games. We also have a lot of games that are going to be, or at least projected to be, one-sided. I'm going to go back to the odds here for this week. We have Tampa Bay favored by a touchdown over the Denver Broncos. We have the Cleveland Browns favored by 6 points over the New York Giants. Both of those are relatively low total games. New Orleans, Philadelphia, 50-point total. Baltimore, Dallas, 49-point total. And Detroit and Arizona at a 52.5 point total are going to be the most popular games people are picking players from on this slate. So I actually do like the fact that our model is super high on Justin Jefferson at receiver and that we can get him relatively late here in the first round. That's just a 45-point total between Houston and Minnesota, but I can absolutely see both of those teams hitting their ceiling in fantasy, especially with these high upside receivers that they have on both sides. So that's definitely where I think I want to be. And what Chuck was talking about, I don't know if anybody heard it, was taking advantage of late swap with Nico Collins because Nico Collins is questionable this week. And if he is, one, we get a discount on him here in the second round. The way he's being used by Houston, he's absolutely their number one receiver by usage. We can take advantage of late swap to get in like a Tank Dell or other receivers near the top of our receiver model there if we need to. Here, remember, in this format, we start one quarterback, one running back, two receivers, tight end, and then there's a flex. More often than not, I am looking to get a second running back for that flex. I think when we did our show for week 1, Chuck and I talked about how that tended to be in the winning lineups more often than not, the running back in the flex. So that's currently what I'm thinking about. So I do like Miami and Seattle, and obviously Tyreek just came off the board. I already have a chance, so we don't have to worry too much here. Talking about how Devontae Adams was a high upside pick in our model, but my number one quarterback this week is Lamar Jackson, and I think I'm going to have a little bit of a different build here without having CD on this roster getting Lamar Jackson. So maybe I can mix things up with a lower owned Dallas play or just no Dallas play. I don't think it's completely necessary on this slate. We're pretty high on, well, you know what? I think I'm just going to go with Trey McBride on the Arizona side of the highest total game on the board, get a little bit of exposure to that as well. There isn't really necessarily a reason to stack here because I think some of these players are still undervalued. Chuck, I don't know if you have any thoughts on what I was talking about. I haven't seen any comments here well, it looks like people are saying that you're frozen. They can't hear you. Frozen for 2 or 3 minutes now. I don't know if that applies to just Chuck or if that applies to me as well. But what are you thinking, buddy? How do you feel about this? Okay. I can ask Chuck questions and then I can like transcribe the audio. It's gonna be like interpret like I'm doing a reverse sign language for Chuck or something here, right? Let us know if you guys like this later time slot for a stream. I think we're gonna try to cater more to people that maybe like this late night stuff. I know for me, this is obviously like normal like prime time, if you will, for Chuck. But I'm usually up doing my grinding for the slates anyway around this time of night after my family's in bed. So this is actually a pretty good time for me to do a show. Um, all right, Chuck. I know the people can't hear you, but I've got Justin Jefferson, Devin A. Chain, Lamar Jackson, and Trey McBride. What do you think about this start? Yeah, so I can probably get Zay Flowers here, and then Chuck seems to like the start here. For those who can't hear him, or once again, please let us know if you can hear Chuck again. Scrolling down, trying to find some unique plays with this. I definitely think I want Zay Flowers here, and I don't think I need to reach for like a Brandon Cooks or like an Ezekiel Elliott to get the to force like the Dallas run back. I think I can just go with like best player available for that final pick. All right, Charbonnet comes off. So we know we want Zay Flowers. And, man, I'm going to go to my projections here. I think what I'll do after I finish this draft is I can hop over and show off some of the top plays in the Occupy model, and then we'll do one more draft to wrap up the show this evening. So for me personally, I think the top tight end, I believe he's the cover boy on our show, is George Kittle. I already went with Trey McBride, so I don't need another tight end here. But Kittle, Brock Bowers are interesting options. At receiver, Nico Collins is actually my number one receiver. My number two receiver on this slate is the one I'm going to take now, and that is Malik Neighbors at that absurd volume for the New York Giants. And then I'll go with Flowers to get that Lamar Jackson correlation. So I think a build like this has some upside. I know I said I would more often than not be targeting two running backs, but with the volume I have expected with Justin Jefferson, Malik Neighbors, and Zay Flowers here, I think I'm very, very happy with the way this particular roster panned out. Projecting for 81.6 points. No idea if that's good or bad, but we'll see what happens come Sunday. All right, I got to get myself logged back in to the model here on our website, and then we can talk a little bit more about how to attack that. So I think earlier in the show, we started showing the wide receiver model. And Chuck was talking about sorting by FanDuel because that's half point scoring. So it's much closer to what we're looking to do here on Underdog. You see, I talked about Jefferson being the number one ranked receiver. Here he is. We got CD, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Devontae Adams, Nico Collins, et cetera, et cetera. I definitely think it's viable to use this as a guide for how you're going to be setting your rankings here on Underdog, be a little bit different than the field. We got Malik Neighbors projected for 5-6% ownership in DFS. I think we have to be all over that spot here. So that's the receivers. Quarterback, we talked about a little bit, but I just want to recap because some of you guys probably didn't hear Chuck. Jared Goff, again, at the top here for us. Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson. If we look at the highest total games, Detroit, Arizona, Philadelphia, New Orleans, Baltimore, Dallas, Houston, Minnesota are the games I think we want to consider for the main slate. Running backs.
Can you let me know that my audio is all right, Chris? Is it kind of weird?
I can still hear you. You did change something, so your levels are different, but I can still hear you very good.
Okay, I came in as a guest, so as long as it's okay for the viewers.
Sweet, a guest and a host. I love that. So we are looking at, I guess our model has finally picked up on the fact that the Rams, sorry, buddy, are like extremely injured. And that's why Jordan Mason is ranking at the top because we're expecting a very favorable game script for him. Looks like he's going to be the biggest chalk on DraftKings at running back anyway. Even on FanDuel, they refuse to give this guy a serious price in regular daily fantasy. But we got James Conner ranking pretty high. That's probably a pretty good tournament pick here, Chuck. On Underdog this week, James Conner, I'm like scrolling, and okay, so his ADP is 27, so you're basically getting him in the 5th, 6th round here as our number 2 running back for tournaments in week number 3 of the NFL season. That seems like a clear buying opportunity. Saquon, Derrick Henry, A-Chain, who I think is number 1 by my regular fantasy rankings. Kyron Williams is not a bad last-round pick. I think he's going to be virtually the entirety of the Rams' offense. I think the Blake Corum touches that we saw last week, keep me honest here, Chuck, were just largely a result of the blowout. I still think Kyron is playing while it's competitive, right?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing with Alvin Kamara going number 4, like, Kyron was a top 2-3 round pick all summer, and now everyone's just overreacting.
Yeah. So we got Charbonnet, we got Montgomery, Tony Pollard, who I think is going to actually be a really good player to own this week. He's number 2 in my running back projections this week, so I'll probably be targeting him. A lot of opportunities here at running back. Let's take a look at tight end to wrap up the look at the model, previewing it. And the model is pretty close to what I actually have for my fantasy rankings. Kittle, Bowers, Goddard, Kmet here at the top. I think Trey McBride, obviously who I just drafted, is a good option. I like Pat Freiermuth as well for tournaments. The volume isn't really there with Pittsburgh this year as far as passing is concerned, but he's absolutely the number 2 target behind George Pickens in that offense, regardless of position. So if they get forced to pass a little bit more, I think Freiermuth really benefits from that here. So that's a look through the model, and obviously you guys watching this live or watching this on replay, you can actually go back and pause this and take a look at the different model pages. And there you go. Happy to show that off, a little bit of a first look at what we're thinking here at OccupyFantasy.com. All of our regular NFL DFS tools are available for as little as $7 a week if you subscribe through OccupyFantasy.com, and we would certainly appreciate that if you haven't done that already and you're interested in what we have for you. So we're going to jump back over to Underdog. I'm going to do one more draft here. And I should obviously mention, Chuck, before I do that every single show that we do here about Underdog stuff is sponsored by Underdog, and we appreciate being partnered with Underdog. You can use promo code Occupy2 if you have not yet signed up to play fantasy sports contests on Underdog Fantasy, and you can get matched. I think, are we still doing the $1,000 match here, Chuck, or is that expired?
I'm not sure, but I saw other people doing 100, so I'm assuming it's back to.
It's probably it's all right. Either way, it's still one of the best offers in the industry here. 100% match up to your first deposit. I believe the limit is now $100. I think you are correct on that. I haven't done a stream in a couple weeks here, so. But obviously, keep an eye out for promos. I believe we have a Pick'em promo, Pick'em/Champions fantasy contest slip promo of half a yard for CD Lamb. So obviously, you want to use that to take advantage of some of the stats we think are beatable here in regular Pick'em contests as well. All right, we're filled up. We're going to be doing one more draft here. Let's see what the pick variance gods give us, and we're back at the number 6 spot. So let's try to do something different than we did on the first draft that I did. We had Jefferson and Achane. I guess I will probably go for Mason if he's still there, since he's number 1, like by a wide margin in our model here against the Rams. I mean, do you think that's a fair ranking here? Do you think the Rams are absolutely in shambles, or are they going to give San Francisco a game here?
Oh, the Rams are in shambles, man.
All right.
They can't even put Cooper Kupp on IR. They already have too many guys on IR. They're only allowed to bring back so many in a season, and they already have 8 guys they want to bring back.
So that has me worried about the season-long portfolios. Like, what happens here in the first 6 to 8 weeks of the season? If they're like 1-7, dude, or you know what I mean? Like, do they even bother bringing these guys back? Or they just like shut them down for the year? That's going to be problematic.
Well, one of the guys I was interested was Jordan Whittington. You have any interest here?
So Brian was talking about that with us in our staff chat earlier this morning. Whittington, I didn't admittedly look at the week 2 route data for the Rams as closely as I wanted to. I'm actually doing that live on the fly right now. Cooper Kupp ran 19 routes last week, 63% from the slot before he exited the game. Jordan Whittington ran 13 routes last week, 64% from the slot. So it seems like he's the direct replacement for Cooper Kupp, at least as far as lining up on the field. I'm not suggesting that he's, like, from a volume perspective, going to be Cooper Kupp. But that certainly seems very interesting. I'm just going to double tap Achane and Mason here, because I love Achane, like, personally this week. And if our model loves Mason, I'm not going to argue with that. And I'll just find my QB, wide receiver, tight end combos elsewhere.
I think this is great to take these 2 guys with the first 2 picks, because then you can really just scroll down for wide receiver guys like Malik Neighbors.
Yeah.
I did want to get some of these questions while I was
also,
gone.
Shout out to Brandon, who was in this contest with us as well, one of our NBA writers, NFL preseason writers, MLB writers here at Occupy Fantasy.
Red Rocket going to boost one of the Panthers wide receivers. Maybe he's still getting open.
We were also discussing that in our staff chat earlier. I think it's outside of what I'm going to be advocating for, but Andy Dalton had a very, very good game for the Panthers that he started last year, had a pretty good connection with his fellow Bingle Hall teammate there, Adam Thielen. That's absolutely an age joke, courtesy of Jake, our MMA writer. I feel like disastrous for you and your Bryce Young exposure in best ball, Chuck, but Andy Dalton starting for Carolina actually is probably going to be good for this offense in the near term. It should improve their efficiency.
Yeah, Deontay Johnson's the guy I'm looking at there. I want to say Adam Thielen had 11 catches the last time Andy Dalton started too. So
yeah, it was like 11, 140, and a touchdown, something like that, like roughly. Obviously, it's over a year ago. I don't have the box scores memorized, but we were having that discussion earlier, a little off the wall. I mean, I can see it. Our model likes Bowers. It likes Devontae Adams. You got that cheap Carolina side on the, as a bring back. it could be interesting in DFS. It's a really cheap thing. It allows you to jam expensive players elsewhere.
And OG also likes Harrison. Detroit gives up a ton of passing yards. It's funny because he was going undrafted last week, and now he's going in the first 2 rounds. But
that's what happens when you score 2
wrong.
touchdowns, I suppose. I think if it's just going to be easy for me to do, I'm going to continue to target Lamar Jackson. Like, I just it's interesting that it seems like in general everyone kind of waits on quarterback, Chuck, until like the 3rd, 4th round now, or at least this week they do. Have you noticed that? Or do you agree, disagree with that approach? Like, what are you thinking there?
Like, I'm fine taking Hurts and Lamar Jackson kind of early, but after that, Anthony Richardson is going this round. I think he's still a great pick. He had one bad game. We know his upside. And then scroll down candidates like Jared Goff and Dak Prescott who show up highly in the model.
I have Godwin ranked very highly this week. I think the Tampa Bay offense being one of the only pass-heavy offenses that we can rely on right now. That is definitely the trend in the NFL. That is the elephant in the room that we have to talk about, Chuck. Pass rate over expected is super, super low through the first 2 weeks of the season for the entire league. Do we think that trend's going to continue, or are we just banking on regression to the mean there, bringing passing back to what we've known for the past 15-plus years?
I wouldn't be surprised if passing ends up down on the season, but there's no way it's going to stay at this level the whole year. It has to regress a little bit. And you said something about 2 running back lineups are generally better in these battle royales. They have higher ROI. But I don't know. This feels like everyone in the drafts is doing it. And so if more people are doing it, then it's optimal. Then that means that not enough people are doing 3 wide receiver builds with the wide receiver in the flex. And with as many scroll down candidates, as few elite guys that we for sure have, I kind of like going that macro leverage approach and going 3 wide receivers more this week.
So I need a receiver and I need a tight end, and unless Brandon takes him out from under me, it's going to be Zay Flowers to pair with Lamar Jackson. But even if he does that, I guess I have that marked Andrews play sitting right there. I am more bullish on Andrews than I think you are. You mentioned earlier in the show while you were having some audio issues that you're still afraid to click on him. Let me try to convince you not to be. Andrews ran 27 routes last week, which was on 75% of Lamar Jackson's dropbacks. Likely's routes run dropped to 18, just 50% of Lamar Jackson's dropbacks. So I think we have a little bit more of an argument now that Likely's week 1 usage might have strictly been matchup based. I know Andrews didn't have like a great game in week 2, but the usage was very, very strong.
Well, I've seen Andrews go undrafted in a bunch of these, so it's probably a pretty good last round pick. And then I want to ask you about elite tight ends overall, because they've been underperforming and I feel like they're going pretty late. And I feel like if you don't get Sam Laporta or better, then it's kind of tough to catch up unless you get, Dallas Goedert catching 2 touchdowns or something.
We have Dallas Goedert as the number 3 tight end in our model, and he's right here for me. So I think I just probably have to do that here. Flowers get a little bit of a Baltimore 2-0 here, and then Goddard at tight end. And I don't know, I like the way this team turned out. I'm not ever worried about what this projected fantasy points number looks like here on Underdog, mostly because if we're trying to optimize for that, all of our rosters are going to look the same. There are just so many players that aren't even being touched that I think are really, really interesting. Pollard barely has an ADP. Jake Ferguson, if he's back for Dallas, could be kind of interesting here. Obviously, we've already discussed Charbonnet. Amari Cooper is an underperforming wide receiver this week. I mean, Sutton is undrafted. I talked about him being the number 1 underperforming wide receiver. So I think that's really how I'm looking at it, Chuck. I think to summarize what we're looking at for week 1, both here in Battle Royale and regular DFS, I like stacking Baltimore and Dallas. Me personally, I like Miami and Seattle for some of the upside there in tournaments. Houston, Minnesota, Detroit, and Arizona. I think that's where the field's going to be this week.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And then I did want to ask if there was anything at the bottom with Green Bay, Tennessee, or Pittsburgh Chargers. J.K. Dobbins goes undrafted in a bunch of these I've done, and then Josh Jacobs had like 32 carries last week.
So I like Calvin Ridley. I think we were talking about that earlier while you were having some audio issues. He has the most air yards in the NFL this year. Going back to the data here. This is your weighted opportunity data for pass catchers. Calvin Ridley, the number 1 receiver for air yards. Malik Neighbors, look at this dude. He has a 96% weighted opportunity in the Giants offense, a 40%, a 38% target share, a 54% share of the air yards. There's crazy opportunity here that you can buy into in some formats like Battle Royale and formats like DFS that the field I don't think is fully adjusted for. So I think now that we've got a little bit more data to back up our leans, it's going to get way more fun to play all the different contests that you can play here on Underdog and abroad in fantasy this year.
Yeah, you just gave me a couple ideas for some smaller game stacks: Ridley and Josh Jacobs, and then Amari Cooper with Neighbors.
There we go. All right, man, this was fun. I hope this was a good first look at week number 3 for everybody. Thanks to Underdog for sponsoring the show, as always. Brian will be back tomorrow with a preview of Thursday Night Football. We are so back with this. Finally, a low total primetime game. The Patriots visiting the New York Jets on Thursday Night Football. And I believe we'll have a daily plug on OccupyFantasy.com available as well sometime tomorrow afternoon. That video will be over on our regular, or will be on this channel, the regular DFS channel for you subscribers. So for Chuck, I am Chris. Thank you for joining us on this stream, and we'll talk to you soon.
I appreciate you guys. Thanks.